Bigfoot stood less than 20 meters from me, among fir trees wet with mist, and the bodycam on my chest was recording everything. I had drawn my gun, but it did not charge. It looked straight at me, raised one finger to its lips as if signaling for silence, then turned its head toward the deep forest. Immediately afterward, heavy footsteps began pounding toward us from 3 different directions. I heard my radio play back my own voice, even though I had never pressed the transmit button. Bigfoot looked at me one last time, backed into the darkness, then signaled that I needed to follow it immediately. Deputy Daniel Mercer, a veteran patrol officer in Skamania County, Washington, received a call from Rachel Cole on a late autumn night. Her 19-year-old son, Tyler, had gone into the Gifford Pinchot Forest to look for the family dog, Scout, and had been out of contact for more than 6 hours. Tyler's final message warned the police not to enter the forest because something is copying my voice. Daniel found Tyler's vehicle abandoned on a dirt road, his phone beneath the seat, and a trail of blood leading into the woods. As he followed the trail, he heard human voices belonging to people who could not possibly be there, while his bodycam recorded figures he never saw with his own eyes. At a damaged hunting shelter, his radio began broadcasting the voice of a fellow deputy, and then Daniel's own voice. A Bigfoot nearly 9 feet tall appeared, signaled for him to remain silent, and led him to a rocky crevice where Tyler was still alive. Tyler revealed that a group of Bigfoot had hidden him to protect him from a 4-legged predator capable of imitating human sounds. After a confrontation inside a cave, Daniel got Tyler out and was met by rescuers the following morning. But reviewing the bodycam later showed dozens of Bigfoot watching them, as well as another dark figure that had been near Daniel long before. The final audio ended with a whisper, "Don't come back, I'm Victor." This story comes from an old post on a local forum and from a description of video footage that was supposedly leaked. I cannot verify that all of the material is true, nor can I say with certainty that this is only a modern legend. So listen with an open mind and decide for yourself what deserves belief. If you have ever experienced something strange in the woods, share it. Leave the word believe. And this is the night of Deputy Daniel Mercer. In late November, as cold air from the Cascades spilled down across the roads around Carson, Deputy Daniel Mercer had a little more than half an hour left in his patrol shift. He had been doing the job long enough to know that late-night calls were rarely as simple as the first report made them sound. So when dispatch told him a woman north of town needed to speak with an officer because her son had not returned after 6 hours, Daniel did not immediately think anything unusual was involved. He turned off the main road, drove past homes growing farther apart beneath rows of fir trees wet with mist, and stopped in front of a small house with the porch light on. Rachel Cole was already waiting outside, both hands gripping her phone. Daniel recognized that kind of tension. People often tried to remain calm until a police officer arrived, and then the fear became visible on their faces. Rachel said Tyler, her 19-year-old son, had driven his old SUV into Gifford Pinchot National Forest to look for Scout, the family dog. Scout had run off that afternoon, and Tyler believed the dog had followed an old logging road he had used before while hunting. Tyler knew the area fairly well, and still had a simple hunting shelter in a clearing from a previous trip. Rachel only began calling repeatedly after darkness fully settled, and Tyler still had not returned. Daniel asked the familiar questions. Had Tyler been drinking, using drugs? Had he ever panicked in the woods, or had he been in conflict with anyone? Rachel said no, and handed him the phone to show him the final message. The short sentence made Daniel read it twice. "Mom, don't let the cops come into the woods. Something is copying my voice." Part of him immediately searched for a practical explanation. Tyler might be injured, hypothermic, panicked, or mishearing sounds in the forest. But Rachel added that before sending that message, Tyler had called asking why she was standing in the woods, calling his name when she was still at home, dozens of minutes away by car. That detail made Daniel stop writing for a second. He did not yet believe Tyler literally, but he no longer viewed this as a young man simply losing track of time. Daniel photographed the message, took the description of the SUV, the route Tyler normally used, and the approximate location of the hunting shelter, then told dispatch to prepare to contact search and rescue. Rachel asked whether he was going into the forest immediately. Daniel said he would locate the vehicle first, assess the situation, and then decide what to do next. When he returned to the patrol car, he could still see Rachel standing beneath the porch light with the phone pressed to her chest. What Daniel carried with him was not belief in a strange story, but the sense that Tyler had been afraid of something strongly enough to warn the very people whose job was to find him. On the way into the forest, Daniel kept thinking about Tyler's last sentence. If the young man was injured, why was he afraid of being found? The Forest Service road narrowed quickly after Daniel left the residential area. Pavement gave way to dirt and stone, and fir trees closed over the sky on both sides. The headlights reflected thin mist into a pale white wall ahead of the windshield. Daniel slowed down and checked each fork according to the directions Rachel had provided. Nearly 20 minutes later, he saw something reflective near the side of the road. Tyler's old SUV sat angled off to one side, as though he had stopped suddenly rather than parked properly. Daniel stopped his patrol vehicle several meters away, reported the location to Lisa Morgan at dispatch, and activated his Bodycam before stepping out. The air outside was cold and smelled of wet earth. The driver's door of the SUV was still open. Daniel called Tyler's name, then shone his light across the front seat, rear seat, and beneath the vehicle. No one answered. The keys were still in the ignition, and Tyler's light jacket lay on the back seat. Daniel looked around the road. The windows were intact, the body showed no collision damage, and the belongings had not been rummaged through. Leaning into the driver's area, Daniel found Tyler's phone on the floor near the seat rail. One corner of the screen was cracked, but it still lit up. The call history showed repeated contact with his mother, and then an abrupt stop. Someone looking for a dog might forget a jacket, but abandoning both the keys and phone in an open vehicle in the middle of the night made Daniel uneasy. He stepped outside, swept the flashlight around the road edge, and began looking for sign. The mud beside the vehicle held a jumble of tracks, including human boot prints and several dog tracks heading toward the forest. About 2 meters ahead, on a wet leaf, Daniel saw a small red dot. He crouched, angled the flashlight, and determined it appeared to be blood. 2 more drops lay several steps apart, followed by a smear on a branch. The feeling inside him changed immediately. A routine missing person search had become a situation in which someone might be injured and needed to be found. Daniel called Lisa, reported the condition of the vehicle, and the blood trail leading away from the road. Lisa said search and rescue was being assembled, but would need time to reach the area, and the nearest backup unit was also far the trees. Daniel looked into the darkness between the trees. Waiting for more people would be safer, but several dozen minutes could matter if Tyler was lying somewhere with a broken leg or blood loss. He decided to go in only far enough to establish a direction of travel and determine whether the victim was close to the road. Daniel took his medical kit, a high-powered flashlight, a backup radio, marked the SUV coordinates, and left a direction marker beside the vehicle. Before stepping through the tree line, he looked back at the SUV one more time. The door was still open, the keys still hanging in the ignition, as though the driver had simply been called outside and expected to return immediately. That detail bothered him more than Rachel's story. If Tyler had willingly gone deep into the woods, he had left behind almost everything he needed to do it. The blood trail was easy to follow at first. Daniel moved slowly, keeping the beam low, looking for droplets on leaves and fresh breaks on branches. The forest still carried familiar sounds. Water dripped from the canopy. A dead branch snapped under his boot. Insects sounded from far away. He stopped and called Tyler's name, then waited. Nothing answered but the woods. The farther he went, the weaker the radio became. Lisa could still hear him, but the signal had begun stretching into long bursts of static. Daniel reported that the trail continued northeast, then marked a tree with reflective tape. He did not notice the change when it began. It came gradually, like a crowded room emptying one person at a time. While checking his compass, Daniel realized the woods had become quieter than normal. The insects were gone. The canopy barely moved, even the dripping water no longer sounded clear. The silence began to press down on him. He stood still for several seconds and heard only his own breathing and the fabric of his jacket rubbing against the equipment strap. Daniel had spent enough time in forest to know that silence could come from weather or from animals reacting to a predator nearby. He reminded himself not to assign meaning to it. Then a woman's voice called his name from the left. Daniel. He turned immediately, flashlight sweeping across wet trunks and low ferns. The voice sounded close, perhaps a few dozen meters away. Daniel first thought of Rachel, even though he knew she had no reason to be there. He called out, ordering the speaker to identify herself. No answer came. Several seconds later, the woman's voice called Daniel again, this time so similar to Rachel's that the skin at the back of his neck tightened. He moved a few steps toward the sound, light held chest high. At that moment, the voice changed. "Officer, I'm here." It was the voice of a young man. Daniel stopped. If it was Tyler, he might be injured and unable to step out. Daniel called Tyler's name and told him to state his condition and keep answering so he could determine the location. The darkness ahead remained silent long enough that Daniel nearly believed he had misheard. Then the young man's voice repeated, "Officer, I'm here." Same rhythm, same pitch, almost the same pause. Daniel felt an uneasiness different from the professional concern he had felt earlier. A frightened person usually changes tone, breathes harder, adds another word or detail. This sounded like a copy rather than a plea for help. He backed to the nearest blood spot and decided to trust what he could see. The trail led to the right, completely away from where the voice had come from. Daniel followed it. At that moment, the body cam on his chest recorded an unusually tall black figure standing between two trees behind him, visible for only a few seconds while Daniel turned. He never saw it. At the time, his only concern remained Tyler. About a minute later, the same young man's voice sounded behind him, weaker this time. "Officer." Daniel did not turn around. The blood trail brought Daniel down a slope and into the clearing Rachel had described. Tyler's old hunting shelter stood beneath a large cedar, and Daniel stopped at the edge of the opening. One side of the shelter had torn loose from its stake, and the entrance was ripped almost to the roof. A backpack lay face down in the mud, with several items scattered through the leaves. Daniel approached, watching the forest edge while calling Tyler's name. No one answered. He checked the backpack first. The wallet, water bottle, backup flashlight, and personal items were still there. The scene did not resemble a robbery or someone packing in a hurry. At the base of the cedar, Daniel's light stopped on a shoe. The size matched Tyler. The sock inside was stained with blood, and the mud around it had been pulled into a long smear leading behind the shelter. Daniel crouched to examine it. The drag mark was broad enough to show that something heavy had slid over the ground. Leaves were pressed aside, and several branches were broken in the same direction. He called Lisa and reported that he had found the shelter, a blood-stained shoe, and signs that the victim had been dragged away. For the first time that night, Daniel used the phrase, "possible animal attack." The wording made the situation more concrete, but it raised more questions. If a bear had attacked Tyler there, why was there so little blood? Daniel followed the drag mark with his light and noticed deep depressions on either side. One near the mud looked almost like a human footprint, but it was so long and wide that he placed his gloved hand beside it for scale. He did not think of Bigfoot yet. Daniel assumed the ground might have collapsed. Two tracks could overlap, or the light could be distorting the shape. but the large depressions continued to appear parallel to the drag mark rather than on top of it. That caught his attention. Whatever had made them seemed to be moving alongside Tyler, not stepping over his body. Daniel photographed the marks, flagged the location, and told Lisa to increase the search and rescue response. She confirmed the team was on the way, but still needed time to reach the area. Daniel looked at the drag trail, disappearing between the trunks. He knew he had gone farther than he originally intended. Turning back now would be safer for him, but the blood-stained shoe under the cedar made that choice hard to accept. Tyler might still be conscious, might be getting colder, and every minute mattered. Daniel decided to continue a little farther, keep the radio open, and mark his path home. When he stood, a distant tree shook violently. There was almost no wind. Daniel lifted the flashlight toward it, but saw only trunks woven into darkness. He stepped out of the clearing and followed the drag marks into the forest. The radio on his shoulder suddenly burst through the static. A familiar male voice came through so clearly that Daniel stopped. It was Deputy Aaron Pike, a man who had patrolled with him for years. "Mercer, turn around now. Don't take another step." Aaron Pike's voice came through the radio so clearly that Daniel froze in the dark path between the trees. The warning carried the exact tone Pike used, calm but urgent, and Daniel's first instinct was to obey. He raised the radio and asked where Pike was and which route he had used to enter the woods. Only a long hiss of static answered. Daniel looked around, flashlight sweeping over wet trunks, searching for another beam of light or any sign of someone approaching. He asked directly whether Pike could see his position. The radio remained silent for several seconds. Then the voice repeated almost exactly the original sentence, with the same breath pattern and familiar rasp. "Mercer, turn around now. Don't take another step." The resemblance was too perfect, and a chill ran along Daniel's spine. A real colleague would answer his question, or at least explain the reason for the order. He switched back to the dispatch channel, called Lisa, and asked whether Aaron Pike had been sent to the area. Lisa's voice broke through the weak signal, but her answer was clear enough. Pike was handling a call on the other side of the county and had never left that location. Daniel stood still, radio still in his hand. He had prepared himself for a bear, a poacher, even a frightened person in the woods, but something using the voice of a familiar colleague to give him commands fell outside every situation he had ever faced. He asked Lisa to confirm again, then requested that from that point onward all communications include an identification code, before he followed any instruction. Lisa agreed. Just as Daniel lowered the radio, Pike's voice came through again, this time sounding almost beside his ear. "Turn around." Daniel did not answer. He crouched, found the drag trail and the small blood marks again, and forced himself to focus on physical evidence. He reduced the problem to one rule. If his ears could be fooled, he would trust what had been left on the ground. The drag trail still led deeper into the woods. Daniel continued, slower than before, and every time the radio cracked with static, his shoulders tightened. He had not gone a full minute before a new sound appeared. This time it was not Pike. It was Daniel's own voice. The sentence coming from the radio speaker was the exact phrase he had just used with Lisa about the confirmation code, including the pause between the two clauses. Daniel stopped, removed the radio from his shoulder, and stared at it as though the explanation might be printed on the black casing. He checked the transmit button, channel, and recording settings, even though he knew this model had no feature that automatically replayed a sentence he had just spoken in that way. He called Lisa and asked whether dispatch had transmitted any recording back to him. Lisa said no. Their system logged radio traffic but did not automatically rebroadcast it on the patrol channel. Daniel felt his hands getting cold inside his gloves. He did not want to call the phenomenon supernatural because the word would not help him find Tyler, but he could no longer pretend it was a simple equipment problem. From the right, between the trees, a woman began crying. It sounded like Rachel. The voice called Tyler's name, then Daniel's, saying her son was dying and begging him to go that way. Daniel kept his eyes on the ground. The blood trail angled to the left. He followed it while the crying to his right became more urgent. When Daniel failed to respond, Rachel's voice stopped abruptly and was replaced by Tyler's, so weak it was almost only breath. "Please, don't answer it." Daniel stopped mid-step. The sentence differed from the earlier repetitions because it contained new content, and that made him hesitate more than anything else. If the real Tyler was nearby, ignoring him could be a mistake. But if whatever was out there had found a new way to lure him away from the trail, responding would tell it which voice was effective. Daniel did not call back. He took out his reflective tape, tied a strip around the nearby tree, and marked the compass direction in his notebook. From that point onward, he decided every change in direction would be based on blood, drag marks, or terrain he could verify. He would no longer trust any sound coming from a place where he could not see the speaker. The decision did not remove his fear, but it gave him something concrete to hold on to. The terrain became steeper. Roots pushed out through the soil, and wet rock made every step careful. The blood trail thinned, which at first made Daniel worry he was losing it, but after several minutes he realized the amount of blood itself was actually decreasing. If a large animal had dragged Tyler after a severe injury, Daniel would have expected more blood, not less. He crouched beside a patch of soft ground and found both sides of the drag trail, appearing on both sides of the drag trail. They occurred in a rhythm almost like footsteps, but their length exceeded any adult boot print. Several horizontal branches above Daniel's head were bent and freshly broken, the wood inside still pale. He shone the light upward and then back to the drag trail. The longer he studied the scene, the less it resembled a simple attack. The large tracks did not cross over Tyler's drag marks. They ran beside them, sometimes shifting to one side or the other as though something had been moving alongside him. Daniel found a strip of fabric from a trouser leg caught on a rock, confirming Tyler had passed through. Near it, on a low tree trunk, were 3 deep scratches slanting downward. They were completely different from the huge prints on the ground. The scratch angle was lower, the spacing between the marks narrower, and the bark had been torn in a way that made Daniel think of claws rather than hands. He crouched, took several photographs, and felt an unpleasant idea form. Perhaps he was not following the sign of one creature. Perhaps at least 2 different things had passed through this area. Just as that thought formed, 3 heavy footsteps sounded ahead, each separated by an even pause. Daniel raised his head. The sound came from darkness in front of him, slow and weighted. A moment later, 3 similar steps sounded to his left, then to his right. He could not tell whether one thing was moving extraordinarily fast around him, or several individuals occupied different positions. Daniel backed against a large tree, dimmed his light, and left the pistol in its holster, but released the retaining strap. He listened. The footsteps stopped. The silence returned, no longer feeling like a natural absence of sound, but like the sensation that everything around him was waiting to see what he would do. Daniel looked down at the evidence again. He began to question whether the large footprints truly belonged to whatever had injured Tyler. If they were the predators, why did they run parallel with the drag trail? If they belonged to something else, why had it followed Tyler? Daniel turned the light back up. The beam moved over ferns, a fallen trunk, and then stopped abruptly on a figure standing in the forest ahead. For the first several seconds, Daniel's mind tried to force what he was seeing into a familiar shape. A person wearing a fur coat, a bear standing on 2 legs, a black tree trunk distorted by the beam, but no explanation lasted longer than a breath. The creature stood upright less than 20 meters away, nearly 9 feet tall, shoulders so wide that the opening between 2 trunks seemed narrower around it. Its body was covered in black-brown hair, thicker over the shoulders and arms. Daniel could clearly see long arms hanging at its sides and a dark face beneath a heavy brow. He had heard Bigfoot stories from local residents, hunters, and tourists, but throughout his years in law enforcement, he had placed them alongside other stories that could never be verified. Now the name appeared in his mind before he wanted to admit it: Bigfoot. Daniel drew his pistol by reflex and brought the muzzle up without aiming directly at the creature's chest. He knew a gunshot in these conditions could turn an uncertain situation into a disaster. Bigfoot did not advance. It looked at Daniel with a degree of focus that made him feel assessed, rather than simply observed by an animal. Daniel held his ground and controlled his breathing. If it charged, he would have to shoot. But several seconds passed and the creature remained still. Then it did something that overturned every assumption Daniel had left. Its right arm rose slowly. One finger moved in front of its mouth. The gesture was simple and so clear that Daniel understood it at once: silence. He nearly forgot the pistol in his hand. A wild animal might warn through posture, growling, or threat displays. But this gesture was too deliberate. Bigfoot did not hold his gaze for long. It turned its head toward the woods behind Daniel, and its entire posture changed. The shoulders tightened. The head lowered slightly. At that exact moment, heavy footsteps sounded again from multiple directions. One to the left, two behind him. Then a deeper step from the slope. Cold sweat formed between Daniel's shoulder blades, despite the chill. The most frightening thing was no longer the nearly 9-foot creature standing in front of him. The frightening thing was that the creature itself seemed to be watching something else approaching. Daniel lowered the barrel slightly. Bigfoot looked at him once more, then backed into the darkness between the trees. It moved more quietly than its size should have allowed, and nearly vanished after only a few steps. Daniel thought the encounter was over, but the creature stopped at the edge of the light, turned its head, and looked at him. Its arm moved once, briefly and clearly, as though signaling him to follow. Daniel did not move. Every professional rule told him to hold position, return along the marked route, and wait for search and rescue. He was alone. The radio signal was unreliable, and the creature ahead was large enough to kill him in seconds if it chose. But Tyler's blood trail also led in the same direction Bigfoot was moving. Daniel looked down, then at the creature. He was not ready to trust it, but he also could not ignore the fact that it had already had a clear opportunity to attack, and had not done so. From deeper in that direction came a weak groan. Daniel heard broken breathing after the sound, different from the repeated voices he had heard earlier. He called Tyler's name once. There was no immediate answer. Bigfoot continued walking, slowly enough for Daniel to keep up, but always maintaining distance. Daniel lowered the pistol and kept one hand on the grip, then followed. The creature moved along the slope in long strides, avoiding dead branches and loose stones as though it knew every section of ground. Daniel had to work to keep pace without slipping. Several times he lost sight of it in the darkness, but whenever that happened, Bigfoot reappeared ahead, stood waiting for a moment, and then continued. It did not lead him in a straight line. Sometimes it circled around thick brush. At other times it avoided a narrow depression Daniel only noticed when he reached it. He began to feel this was not random movement. After several minutes, Bigfoot stopped beside a cluster of fallen trees pressed against a rocky slope. Daniel saw several fresh drops of blood on a low stone. His heart beat faster because the sign confirmed Tyler had passed this way. Bigfoot stood to the right of a narrow rock opening, looked down, then looked at Daniel. After that it stepped out of the beam and disappeared among the trees on the hillside. Daniel did not follow the creature farther. He knelt beside the opening and shone his light down. Beneath was a deeper and natural descending passage. Daniel called Tyler's name. Several seconds passed. From below came a very weak voice. This time it did not tell him to move anywhere. The speaker said he was Tyler Cole. Daniel still did not trust it immediately. He asked his mother's name, his age, the color of the SUV, and the dog's name. The voice answered, Rachel, 19, an old gray Every detail matched. For the first time since leaving the road, some of the pressure in Daniel's chest eased. Tyler was alive. He reported the approximate coordinates to, but the signal broke apart before she could fully confirm receiving them. Daniel secured a rope to a sturdy tree, checked the first aid kit, and began looking for a route down. When his flashlight swept across the rocks below, Tyler curled farther into the crevice and raised a hand to cover his face. His voice trembled, but was clearer than before. "Turn the light off," Tyler said. "It knows where the light is." Daniel immediately lowered the flashlight beam to the rock floor and switched off the main light, leaving only the weak red glow on his vest. Darkness closed around them so quickly that it took several seconds before he could make out Tyler's outline. The young man sat with his back against a slanted slab of rock, his remaining sock dark with mud and dried blood. His right ankle was badly swollen, and the trouser leg was torn near the joint. Daniel knelt and told Tyler to look directly at him so he could evaluate his level of awareness. Tyler correctly gave his name, his mother's name, his birth date, and the location where the vehicle had been abandoned, but his eyes kept darting toward the dark passage behind Daniel, as if he were waiting for something to appear there. Daniel checked his pulse, examined his pupils, gently felt around the ankle, and determined that Tyler might have a severe sprain or a fracture, but was not showing signs of dangerous blood loss. He gave him water in small sips, then stabilized the leg using materials from the medical kit. Every movement Daniel made was slow and deliberate, because he understood Tyler was close to exhaustion and panic. When Daniel said search and rescue was on the way, Tyler immediately grabbed his wrist. The grip was not strong, but the reaction came so quickly that Daniel stopped. Tyler told him not to call out loudly again, and never to answer any voice unless he could actually see the person speaking. Daniel asked where Scout was. Tyler lowered his head and said he had lost track of the dog early in the night and did not know whether Scout was still nearby or had gone back toward the road. The answer made Daniel realize Tyler still clearly remembered why he had entered the forest, which meant he was not completely disoriented from severe hypothermia. Daniel then asked what had brought him down into the rock crevice. Tyler did not answer immediately. He looked up into the darkness where Daniel had descended, listened for a long time, then asked a question that made the back of Daniel's neck go cold. "Did you see the big ones?" Daniel knew exactly what he meant. The image of the nearly 9-foot creature, its long arms, and the finger raised to its lips came back at once. He said he had seen one and that it had led him there. Tyler closed his eyes for a moment, as though the answer confirmed what he had hoped. Daniel expected Tyler would want to leave immediately now, that help was near, but Tyler shook his head. He looked deeper into the tunnel and said quietly that they could not go out yet. Daniel asked why. Tyler swallowed, both hands tightening around the edge of his jacket, then said something that changed the meaning of the entire scene outside in Daniel's mind. "Bigfoot didn't drag me in here to kill me. They dragged me in here to hide me." Daniel remained silent for several seconds, because Tyler's words fit what he had seen: the drag trail through the shelter, the lost shoe, the huge tracks traveling beside Tyler. Then the Bigfoot itself leading Daniel to the crevice. The scene began suggesting an entirely different possibility. Daniel told Tyler to start at the beginning and explain everything in order. Tyler took a slow breath and began with Scout's disappearance. The dog had run into the woods after hearing a whistle. Tyler drove along the old road, got out when he saw Scout's paw prints in the mud, and went deeper because he thought the dog was close. Then he heard Rachel's voice calling him from the forest. Tyler stopped because he knew his mother was at home. The voice kept calling, then changed into Scout whimpering as though injured. That sound pulled him farther forward because his concern for the dog overrode his caution. Near the hunting shelter, Tyler saw a low shape move quickly across the woods. It was faster than a bear, its body close to the ground, and it seemed to disappear the moment it changed direction. Tyler panicked and ran toward the vehicle, but slipped on rock and badly injured his ankle. He tried to stand and dragged himself across the clearing. Then he saw 3 Bigfoot in the trees. At the time, he saw only 3 enormous bodies blocking the way and believed he had run from one danger directly into another. He changed direction toward the slope. One Bigfoot stepped out and blocked him. A second approached from the side and grabbed his clothing. Tyler fought back and tried to tear himself free. At that exact moment, he heard something rushing rapidly behind him. A 4-legged animal burst through the spot where Tyler had been standing, slammed into brush, and vanished. The Bigfoot pulled Tyler away from that direction. He struggled because he thought he was being taken. His shoe came off near the cedar. One creature held his upper body, another dragged him across the leaves, creating the trail Daniel had followed. Tyler remembered the force was enormous, but they did not bite him, strike him, or deliberately worsen his injury. At the rock crevice, the Bigfoot pushed him down the concealed slope out of sight and remained around the entrance for a while. Tyler heard heavy footsteps above and low sounds between them. Eventually, they moved away. Daniel looked at the bandage around Tyler's ankle and thought through every mark he had seen outside. The lost shoe, the drag line, the large parallel tracks, all of it fit Tyler's account. He understood that he had misread the scene from the beginning. Bigfoot had not dragged Tyler away as prey. They had moved him out of the path of something else. Daniel asked what the 4-legged creature was. Tyler shook his head and said he had never seen its face clearly. He only knew that it followed him using familiar voices and had never stopped searching. Then Tyler raised a hand and pointed toward the dark tunnel behind them. "It found another way in here," he said. Daniel turned toward the passage Tyler indicated. The red light only showed the nearest edge of stone, while everything farther inside remained black. He kept Tyler behind him and lowered the light. On the right wall, Daniel saw long grooves slanting downward. They were deeper than the scratches he had found outside, and fresh stone dust lay beneath them, not yet darkened by moisture. He brought his hand close to estimate the spacing. They did not resemble knife marks or any bear claws he had seen. Tyler said the scratches had begun appearing about an hour earlier. At first he heard scraping deep in the rock, then the sound moved around as though the creature were testing multiple entrances. Sometimes it used Rachel's voice to call him outside. Other times it made scout bark directly behind the wall. Tyler stayed silent, turned off his light, and refused to answer. The worst moment had happened before Daniel reached the crevice. From the passage behind Tyler, the creature had used Daniel's own voice to call his name. Daniel felt cold across his chest. He had never met Tyler before that night. If Tyler was correct, whatever was inside the cave had either heard Daniel from a long distance or had been close enough to learn his voice. Daniel remembered the copied calls surrounding him in the forest and the feeling of being followed through the silence. He did not know how long the thing had been near him. He checked the radio. The screen still glowed, but the signal was too weak to reach dispatch. They could wait for rescuers, but Tyler was getting colder, and the creature was searching for an entrance. Daniel asked whether Tyler could stand with help. Tyler pushed himself against the rock, shifted weight onto his good leg, and nodded. Daniel moved an arm under his shoulder and helped him stand for several seconds to test his ability to move. Tyler could manage it, though every motion tightened his face with pain. Daniel decided they needed to leave the cave before the situation worsened. He bent to collect the medical kit when 3 evenly spaced knocks sounded from deep in the tunnel. Both men froze. There was a clear pause between each impact, more like a deliberate signal than falling stone. A moment later, 3 other knocks came from high above near the original entrance, matching the rhythm but deeper. Daniel looked up. His first thought was Bigfoot. The creatures that had stood around the entrance might have returned and could be signaling one another. The thought offered a small amount of hope. If they were outside, perhaps the way out remained safe. Tyler did not appear relieved. He said he had heard knocks before and had never known which belonged to Bigfoot and which belonged to the thing hunting him. Daniel looked at the two opposing dark passages. After everything that had happened, he understood that even a signal without a human voice was no longer trustworthy enough to choose a direction. He decided to try the original exit before taking Tyler deeper into the cave. If Bigfoot really was above, it was still the shortest route toward search and rescue. Daniel helped Tyler turn toward the slope and let the young man place most of his weight on his shoulder. Each step was slow because of the wet rock and because Tyler could only put weight on his injured leg for seconds at a time. They had not gone far when small stones fell from above, rolled past Daniel's feet, and vanished into the dark. He stopped and raised the light without shining it directly at the opening. A large shape passed across the weak glow above. Daniel saw only part of the body for an instant, not enough to know whether it was Bigfoot or something else. Tyler held his breath. Then Lisa Morgan's voice came down from the entrance. Clearer than any radio signal Daniel had received for several minutes. "Mercer, search and rescue is here." Daniel nearly answered by reflex. His mouth had already started to open when one detail stopped him. Lisa was at dispatch miles away from the forest. Even if search and rescue had reached the area, she could not possibly be standing at the opening calling him directly. Daniel raised one hand to silence Tyler. Lisa's voice repeated the same sentence in the same rhythm and volume, without a question or any response. The brief hope Daniel had felt disappeared. Tyler leaned close and whispered that this was exactly how the thing had worked from the beginning. It always used whatever the listener most wanted to believe. Daniel backed away from the slope. The shortest exit was now the most dangerous place. He studied the cave chamber and searched for airflow. To the left, a narrow passage carried a cold draft smelling of wet earth. The moving air suggested it might lead outside. Daniel knew choosing that route meant entering an unmapped tunnel, but remaining under the opening where the false voice waited was worse. He told Tyler they would try the side passage and turn back if it dead-ended. Tyler nodded. Daniel helped him change direction. Before leaving the chamber, he looked once more toward the entrance. Lisa's voice had stopped. The silence made it feel as though whatever stood above understood they had not taken the bait. The two moved into the left tunnel. The ceiling lowered, forcing Daniel to bend while supporting Tyler. The cold airflow grew stronger with every meter, giving him some hope that an exit truly existed. Then the red light swept over the dust in front of them. Daniel stopped immediately. A fresh track lay in the fine dust, long and marked by several claw tips dug deeply into the rocky soil. Its edges were sharp and had not yet collected dust. The print pointed from deeper in the tunnel toward them. Tyler looked down and then up again, his face going completely pale. Daniel understood the side passage was not empty at all. Their hope of escape turned into the feeling that they were walking directly toward it. Something had passed there very recently, and its tracks were completely different from the Bigfoot prints outside. Daniel switched on the main flashlight. Weak red light was no longer useful if the thing that left those claw marks could be directly ahead. The white beam showed a larger rock chamber beyond. Daniel told Tyler to stay tight against the wall behind him. He drew his pistol, kept the muzzle low, and advanced one step at a time. More large four-legged tracks crossed the dusty floor. Several tufts of hair were caught against the rock, shorter and coarser than the fur Daniel had seen on Bigfoot outside. That reinforced Tyler's account. Whatever had been hunting him was not the same kind of creature. The chamber widened. As Daniel stepped past a natural stone column, Tyler tightened his grip on his shoulder. He had heard breathing. Daniel froze. From the narrow opening opposite came a low, heavy, even sound, like the lungs of a large animal after running. Daniel moved Tyler behind the column and stood in front of him. If the creature came through, Daniel had to keep it away from Tyler long enough for him to retreat. A long scrape ran across stone. Then everything went silent. Daniel raised the pistol to chest level. A roar exploded from the opposite passage, powerful enough to vibrate in Daniel's chest. Tyler went pale and said that was the sound that had chased him all night. Daniel aimed the flashlight into the passage. At the far edge of the beam, two reflective points appeared close to the ground. They remained still for one beat. Then they moved forward. Daniel saw a low head, raised shoulders, and a body larger than any bear he had encountered. It moved on four legs, but its speed and sudden shifts made it difficult to follow. Dark hair covered the body, and the face disappeared between light and stone shadow. Daniel stopped trying to identify it. The distance was shrinking too fast. He motioned Tyler farther back and aimed at the front of the body. The creature charged. Daniel fired. The gunshot in the enclosed cave made his ears ring, and the muzzle flash illuminated the chamber for an instant. The bullet made the creature hesitate, but only briefly. It lowered its body and continued forward. Daniel fired again and retreated toward Tyler. He saw no reaction strong enough to believe the pistol could stop it. The distance was now only several meters. Tyler tried to move on his good leg, but caught his foot on a rock and nearly fell. Daniel held him with his left hand, while keeping the pistol in his right. He understood that he could not drag Tyler through the narrow tunnel and maintain distance from an animal several times faster than they were. The creature compressed its body, shoulders lowering as though preparing to spring. Daniel tightened his finger on the trigger and waited for it to come closer. Just before it launched, another roar exploded behind Daniel. This sound was deeper, louder, and so close that dust shook from the rock wall. Tyler's eyes widened. Daniel did not need to turn around to know that whatever was behind him was large enough to make the predator in front of them hesitate. Daniel had not even turned when a massive body surged past his shoulder and charged directly into the four-legged creature. It was the Bigfoot that had led him to the rock crevice. The impact was so heavy, Daniel felt it travel through the stone floor into his knees. The four-legged animal was knocked sideways but twisted around, immediately claws scraping hard over the rock. Bigfoot followed, using both hands to force the front of its opponent down, as though it knew exactly what needed to be held away from Tyler. Daniel froze for only a heartbeat. Several hours earlier, he had drawn his gun the moment he saw Bigfoot in the forest. Now that same creature had placed its body between him and something that had taken bullets and kept coming. Tyler grabbed Daniel's sleeve and pointed toward a narrow opening on the opposite side of the chamber. Daniel understood immediately. This was their only chance. He lowered the pistol, carefully kept the muzzle away from the two creatures fighting, and pulled Tyler's arm over his shoulder. A deep roar sounded behind them as Bigfoot was driven into the wall. Loose rock fell from the ceiling around their feet. Daniel considered turning back and firing again, but the two bodies were too close and moving too fast. A misplaced bullet could strike the very creature protecting them. He forced himself to abandon the idea. His job was to get Tyler out. Daniel pulled him toward the narrow passage, feeling nearly all of Tyler's weight shift onto his left shoulder. Every time Tyler put his right foot down, his entire body jerked from pain. Behind them, impacts against stone, roaring, and clawing merged into one chaotic sequence. Daniel stopped looking back. He kept his eyes on the darkness ahead and searched for any sign the tunnel led upward. The passage narrowed faster than he expected. They had to turn sideways through a section where the stone pressed close enough that Daniel's medical bag and equipment pouch caught on a projection. He stopped, pulled once, then heard a heavy impact behind them, closer than before. Unwilling to be trapped by equipment that could be replaced, Daniel removed the extra pouch from his belt and left it on the stone floor. He kept only his pistol, radio, flashlight, and compact medical kit. Tyler looked back, but Daniel pushed him forward. The air ahead was colder and smelled strongly of wet earth, a sign that Daniel believed meant they were getting close to an exit. After several meters, the ceiling dropped. Daniel had to bend almost double while still supporting Tyler. The young man was breathing hard, trying to use his good leg to reduce the weight on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel felt his own muscles begin to shake from strain, but he would not allow himself to slow for long. Behind them, the battle suddenly changed into a sharp shriek, followed by a painful roar from Bigfoot. Daniel stopped for half a step. Every reflex told him to turn around. That creature had led him to Tyler, warned him to stay silent, and was now holding back the predator so they could escape. Leaving it behind created a feeling close to guilt, something Daniel never imagined he could feel toward a creature like this. Tyler seemed to understand what he was thinking. He tightened his arm around Daniel's shoulders and said they had to keep moving. Daniel knew he was right. If he turned back, Tyler would lose the only person capable of getting him out. He continued toward the airflow. A crack sounded overhead. Daniel looked up just as a large slab of rock fell behind them, smashing into the route they had just crossed and throwing dust around their legs. The stone did not completely block the tunnel but made returning dangerous. That removed the last remaining choice. Daniel brought Tyler over a sloping section of rock, pushed him upward first, then climbed after him. The sounds of fighting became quieter behind the stone, but after a while, Bigfoot roared again, this time farther away and broken. Tyler slipped to one knee. Daniel caught him, adjusted the support, and kept moving. Tyler suddenly said that if the thing caught up, Daniel should leave him and run. The statement was so calm that it disturbed Daniel more than panic would have. Tyler had been in the forest long enough to begin thinking of himself as a burden. Daniel told him he had gone in to bring Tyler out, and he was not changing that objective now. He said nothing else. He focused on each meter of tunnel and the airflow growing stronger ahead. Finally, above them appeared a patch of darkness different from the cave shadows, accompanied by the unmistakable smell of wet leaves. Daniel pushed Tyler through a low opening threaded with exposed roots. Tyler crawled out first, then Daniel used his shoulder to lift the rest of him over the rock edge. When Daniel pulled himself outside, the cold forest air struck his face like a shock. Both men rolled into wet leaves on the slope. For several seconds, Daniel simply lay there and breathed. After the enclosed echoes of the cave, the open air felt so wide it made him dizzy. He sat up, checked Tyler, then looked back toward the opening. Nothing came out. The sounds of fighting had stopped. That silence left him unsure whether to feel relief or greater fear. Daniel helped Tyler stand. When he looked up the slope, he saw 3 large figures between the trees. The light before dawn was weak, but he immediately recognized the upright stance, broad shoulders, and long arms. 3 Bigfoot kept enough distance that Daniel did not feel surrounded. One looked directly toward the cave opening, while the other 2 faced lower into the forest. Tyler saw them at the same time and said this was the group that had pulled him from the clearing. His voice no longer carried the same fear as earlier. He spoke as if recognizing from a distance the beings that had helped him. Daniel kept a hand close to his pistol, but did not draw. The fact surprised even him. Several hours earlier, seeing 3 Bigfoot at once would probably have made him respond with a weapon. Now he understood that if these creatures had wanted to harm them, they had already had easier opportunities. A sound came from another opening in the rock. All 3 Bigfoot tensed at once. Daniel turned. A large figure emerged from a different gap slightly farther along the slope. It was the Bigfoot that had fought inside. It moved more slowly now, one shoulder held lower, but it was still standing. Daniel felt a strange relief seeing it alive. The 3 on the slope did not rush toward it. Instead, they held their positions and continued watching the forest around them. That behavior made Daniel understand that the fight in the cave had not necessarily ended the greater danger. The predator might still be alive, or there might be others outside. The injured Bigfoot looked once at Daniel and Tyler, then turned toward an area of thinner trees downhill. One of the 3 on the slope shifted aside, revealing a natural route between cedar trunks. Daniel compared the direction to the shortest route he remembered from the compass. The path Bigfoot had opened was not the most direct line toward the SUV. He hesitated. Professional instinct made him want to choose his own route, using the map and marked positions. But the false sounds had repeatedly exploited exactly those habits. Daniel looked at Tyler, then at the three Bigfoot, and chose the corridor they had left open. He did not call it complete trust. It was only an acknowledgement that these creatures had hidden Tyler, helped both of them escape the cave, and repeatedly moved them away from danger, while the human-like voices had tried all night to pull them in the wrong direction. Daniel helped Tyler down the slope. The three Bigfoot did not walk closely behind. They moved parallel at a distance, sometimes appearing between trunks and sometimes disappearing from view. It felt more like an escort than a hunt. Even so, Daniel did not relax. Every few dozen steps he stopped to listen and check the terrain. Tyler was growing more exhausted, his injured foot dragging through wet leaves. After one descent, Scout's bark sounded from the left. Tyler stopped immediately. The sound was close, weak, and followed by a familiar whine that made him turn. Daniel saw the reaction on Tyler's face before he spoke. Tyler had entered the forest for the dog and had spent the entire night believing Scout might be injured somewhere nearby. The barking repeated, followed by a long whimper as though the animal were in pain. Tyler started to move left. Daniel held his shoulder. He reminded him they could not see Scout. Tyler knew, but worry still pulled his body toward the sound. Then the dog noises stopped. A woman's voice appeared in the same place, calling Tyler's name in Rachel's voice. Tyler closed his eyes, face tightening. His mother's voice begged him to come over, saying she had found Scout and was waiting. Daniel felt cold anger replace fear. The thing in the forest was not simply copying sounds. It chose voices capable of forcing a response. For Tyler, it used his mother and the dog. For Daniel, it had used fellow officers and dispatch. Daniel turned Tyler toward him and told him to trust only what they could see. Tyler breathed slowly, nodded, then turned his back on the voice. They continued downhill. A Bigfoot ahead suddenly stepped out and blocked a wide trail. Daniel stopped. It was the easiest route and almost certainly would have taken them downhill faster. He looked at the creature and tried to understand the gesture. Bigfoot remained still, its body turned slightly to the right. Before Daniel could decide, a very fast four-legged shape crossed the trail ahead, less than 30 meters away. It swept between two patches of brush and vanished. Tyler backed against Daniel. If they had continued along the easy route, they would have walked directly into its path. Daniel looked at Bigfoot again. The creature backed away from the trail and turned toward the denser corridor of trees on the left. This time, Daniel did not hesitate long. He guided Tyler that way. The choice changed something inside him. He no longer considered Bigfoot a variable to avoid in the survival problem. At least, for the moment, they had become a source of information more reliable than human voices. They continued through the gray light before dawn. Daniel estimated search and rescue had probably reached Tyler's SUV and was following his markers. The radio signal came and went, mostly static. After several minutes, a human voice shouted from below the slope, "Sheriff's office!" Daniel Mercer. Daniel and Tyler both stopped. This voice sounded different from the machine-like repetitions. It carried the natural echo of someone calling through woods and a touch of breathlessness. Daniel felt hope rise but did not allow himself to answer immediately. A white light flickered low between the trunks, like a search team flashlight. The voice called again, saying Lisa had transmitted Daniel's last coordinates and asking him to report his position. The detail made complete sense. Daniel raised the radio. Before he could press the button, the same sentence sounded behind them. Same voice, same rhythm, every word identical. Daniel felt the hope he had just experienced split in two. One of the sources was false, and he did not know which had come first. He switched the radio to the channel he had used with Lisa and called the confirmation code they had agreed on earlier. The signal broke into static. After several seconds, a man's voice answered with the first half of the code before disappearing. Daniel looked downhill, trying to locate the light. Then, from the woods to the right, came the exact first half of the code that had just transmitted over the radio. The thing had learned it almost immediately. Daniel lowered the radio. Any method based on sound was now useless. If he kept testing codes, he would only give the mimic more material. Daniel needed a visible signal. He remembered a small flare in the emergency pocket on his vest, meant for marking a location for rescue teams. He took it out, kept Tyler close to a tree, and looked around. The 3 Bigfoot were still higher on the slope. What caught Daniel's attention was that none of them looked toward the voices calling "Sheriff's Office." All 3 had turned toward the deeper forest behind them, bodies tense in the same way the first Bigfoot had been when it told him to stay silent. From that direction came heavy footsteps, one impact, then another, farther away. Daniel did not know whether these were more Bigfoot or something else. He raised the flare, preparing to fire it into an opening so the real rescue team could answer with a visual signal. At that moment, one Bigfoot came quickly down the slope and stood directly between Daniel and the direction of the rescue voice. The creature did not look at him. It stared into the darkness ahead, as though the thing calling Daniel's name was not someone he should go toward. Daniel held the flare but did not fire immediately. Bigfoot stood in the direction of the rescue voice, its enormous body filling most of the gap between 2 cedar trees. It did not turn toward him or make the urging gesture it had used earlier. All of its attention remained on the darkness ahead, where a man's voice had just called Daniel's name in the exact tone of a search team member. After everything that had happened, Daniel understood that sound was no longer reliable evidence. He looked at Tyler. The young man was struggling to stand on one leg, face pale with pain and exhaustion. Tyler looked at Bigfoot, then at the direction of the voice, waiting for Daniel to decide. In that moment, Daniel realized he had reached a choice that would have sounded absurd only hours earlier. On one side was a human voice calling him by name. On the other was a creature he had once believed belonged only to local stories, yet every action it had taken since appearing had helped him survive, and had moved Tyler away from danger. Daniel no longer had time to debate with himself. He turned toward an opening to the right, raised the flare, and fired it into the sky. Red light burst above the canopy, painting the forest slope a strange pale color. Then from farther to the right, away from the place where the rescue voice had been coming from, another flare rose and opened red in the air. Tyler exhaled hard, as though released from an invisible pressure. Bigfoot stepped aside, revealing a corridor of dense trees toward the second flare. Daniel immediately helped Tyler move that way. Behind them, the man's voice kept calling. It changed into Rachel's voice, then Scout barking. Then finally Daniel's own voice ordering Tyler to come back. Tyler flinched when he first heard his mother, but this time he did not change direction. He was still afraid, still hurt, and still desperately wanted to believe Scout might be nearby. But he understood now that the thing hunting him used emotion like a hook. 3 Bigfoot moved behind and to either side at enough distance not to block them. Daniel briefly saw a low shape move between the trees behind. The Bigfoot formed a wide line, backs toward Daniel and Tyler, facing the darkness where the movement had disappeared. Daniel could have drawn his pistol and fired if the predator appeared, but he knew a gunshot in this situation could easily hurt the creatures standing between them. Every step now had only one purpose: reach the real lights before Tyler's body could no longer continue. They crossed a low stretch of brush, and white beams began appearing between the trees. This time, Daniel could clearly see the people holding the lights, reflective jackets, and the way they moved in a search formation. He still did not call out until one member raised a handheld flare and gave the agreed visual signal. Only then did Daniel answer. 2 search and rescue members ran toward them. One supported Tyler while the other checked Daniel and called for additional medical personnel. The moment Tyler was transferred to a folding litter, Daniel felt his legs weaken. He had held his body under tension for so long that fatigue only arrived once someone else took responsibility. The three Bigfoot remained among the trees at a safe distance from the rescue lights. One turned its head toward Daniel for several seconds. Then all three gradually backed into the forest. The one thing Daniel knew for certain was that if Bigfoot had not blocked the false rescue voice only minutes earlier, he might have led Tyler straight into the darkness. By full daylight, Tyler was brought to the staging area near his SUV. Rachel ran to him as soon as she saw the litter and embraced her son while medical personnel tried to keep the injured leg stable. Daniel stood several steps away and did not intrude on their moment. He only said Tyler had been found in a rock crevice and had injured his leg. The rest was too difficult to explain among radio traffic, rescue lights, and people doing their jobs. Another team reported that Scout had been found near the SUV at dawn. The dog was dirty, cold, and exhausted, but alive. When Tyler heard that, he closed his eyes, visibly more relieved than at any point since Daniel had found him. That detail closed the reason Tyler had entered the woods, but explained nothing that happened afterward. Daniel checked his pistol, recorded the number of rounds fired in the cave, and reported that the Bodycam would need to be sealed as evidence. He used the simplest explanation possible. The footage might contain evidence of an animal attack and the rescue process. Tyler overheard and quietly asked whether Daniel had really seen three Bigfoot on the hillside. Daniel looked at him for several seconds before nodding. From that moment on, at least they knew part of the night did not exist only in the memory of one exhausted and frightened person. Daniel did not tell the others at the scene anymore. He knew any story involving Bigfoot, copied voices, and a four-legged creature that kept coming after gunshots would make people focus on the strange elements instead of the evidence they could verify. Several hours later, after Tyler had been transported for treatment and Daniel completed the initial report, a technician responsible for backing up the data called him into the evidence review room. The technician's first question was not about the number of shots or the location where Tyler had been found. He asked Daniel how many creatures he believed had been standing on the hillside when he pulled Tyler out of the cave. Daniel said 3. The technician said nothing and simply started the video. The image shook violently as Daniel and Tyler crawled from the rock opening. Then the camera lifted just as 3 Bigfoot appeared between the trees. When the technician increased the brightness and slowed the footage frame by frame, the forest behind those 3 creatures began to emerge. Daniel initially thought the dark shapes were tree trunks. Then he recognized shoulders, heads, long arms. The technician paused, moved through several frames, and increased contrast. Dozens of tall figures stood scattered across the hillside, some showing only heads and shoulders, others nearly hidden completely by trees. They did not come downhill. They did not move toward Daniel and Tyler. They simply stood there, all focused on the area around the cave entrance. Daniel felt a coldness different from anything he had experienced in the forest. At the time, he had believed he could see all the danger around him. The footage showed he had never known how many creatures were actually present. The technician rewound farther, to before the first Bigfoot appeared. In several clips where Daniel followed the blood trail, the camera recorded a black figure standing behind him. It appeared only near the edge of the frame, usually between 2 trees, and disappeared whenever Daniel was about to turn around. What bothered him more was that the body proportions did not match the Bigfoot on the hillside. The figure was narrower. The head and shoulders formed a different silhouette. In several frames, its posture looked too motionless for an animal following someone. Daniel did not want to guess. He only asked the technician to compare the timestamps of the figure's appearances with the radio log. Several moments matched the times when the false voices began calling his name. The overlap did not prove the dark figure was the mimic, but it made Daniel understand that something had been near him long before the first Bigfoot signaled him to remain silent. The technician said the Bodycam had continued recording audio for several minutes after Daniel believed he had turned it off. They opened the final section. The image showed almost nothing except the ground, the edge of a rescue vehicle, and boots moving past. Human voices faded as Tyler was taken toward the staging area. Then the area grew quieter. A series of heavy footsteps sounded from behind the camera. They moved closer, slow, and waited. Daniel stared at the screen, trying to remember where he had been standing at that moment, but he could not place it. Then a very low voice sounded directly beside the microphone. "Don't come back." Goose Lesh rose over Daniel's arms. He asked the technician to play it again. The voice was the same. It did not sound like Aaron Pike, not Lisa, not Rachel, not Tyler. Most importantly, it did not sound like Daniel. Tyler later heard the clip as well and said he did not recognize the speaker. The technician returned to the last frame before the camera shut down completely. 3 Bigfoot were still visible on the hillside. With the brightness increased, the dozens of other figures remained behind them. But between 2 consecutive frames, every one of them turned its head in the same direction, toward the deeper forest. They were no longer looking at Daniel, not at the rescue team, not at the cave entrance. The entire group appeared to react to something outside the frame. That moment remained with Daniel longer than the fight inside the cave. Access to the Bodycam file was later restricted during an internal review. Some of the footage was said to have appeared on an online forum before disappearing, but Daniel never confirmed who had released it. He did not become a Bigfoot hunter or a speaker at conferences. He continued working in law enforcement, changing only one personal rule when dealing with missing people in the forest. A human voice was no longer enough to prove that a person was located in the direction from which the sound came. Tyler's leg healed, and he avoided returning to that area. Daniel never learned whether the Bigfoot saved them out of compassion, territorial behavior, or simply because the 4-legged predator was a common enemy. But whenever he remembered the final frame, he returned to another question. Perhaps the most frightening thing in the forest that night was not Bigfoot. Perhaps it was not even the 4-legged creature that hunted Tyler. What kept Daniel awake was the image of dozens of Bigfoot all turning their heads at the same moment toward the darkness, as though they had heard something approaching that human beings were never allowed to see.